Welcome to Uncommon Courage. My name is Andrea Edwards, and I'm very excited to introduce you to Aoja Aron. Welcome, Aoja. How are you?
I'm okay, Andrea. Thank you very much to have me. I'm so happy to
uh,
be part of this discussion. Thank you.
well, I want to tell everyone why you're here with me today. So we met on a Twitter. I can't call it X. It's called the Climate Crisis Club, which is happening every Saturday night. And it's a really interesting group of people who come together and talk about what's going on in the world. And it represents everybody from across the world. And Aoja, you really stood out to me as someone with a lot of integrity, deep passion. And I was just blown away by what you were talking about. And I wanted to get you here just to hear some more so that other people can learn about who you are and what you're doing. And maybe you'll be able to create even more impact with your work if people can get behind you and support you. So let's just kick it off with you. Just tell me your story, where you're from and how you ended up working with refugees.
Thank you very much, Andrea Edwards. I'm called Aoja Aron, and I'm from Kampala, Uganda, in Africa, of course, which is also almost called the Pearl of Africa, Uganda. Yeah, I have a bachelor's degree in forest science and environmental management, whereby I graduated in 2017. And I've been working with different humanitarian partners, different organizations, and some of the companies in really impacting communities in changing their lives, especially through livelihoods and training them to have sustainable ways of using natural resources.
Mm.
My background, I first worked with ESCO, Uganda Limited, which was a company dealing in cocoa, vanilla, moringa, chilies, where I used to train farmers on agronomy, how to maintain their plantations to get fruits from their fields. From there, around 2019, during the lockdown, during the COVID break, yeah, I switched from the company. And then I went to the northeastern part of the country, the Karamoja sub-region, which is greatly affected by disasters and prolonged drought, where I volunteered with Andre Foods International in Abim district for a month, whereby we were training communities on good nutrition and giving them food with support from World Food, whereby we used to support communities with different ways of how to improve their nutrition at household level and also improving the lives of the communities within there. And then from there, I crossed over to uh, that is Caritas on the New York project with CRS, still in Karamoja, which was a project in 5 districts, and the resilience department, whereby we used to train communities on disaster risk reduction, where we used to train them on early warning, ways in which communities can be able to mitigate some of the disasters that happen in their communities. For instance, the floods, for instance, the dry season where people set fires, bushfires, the diseases, epidemics that would set in their communities, would really train communities on how to conserve also water within their plantations, because we know in most of these areas, especially the northeastern part of the country, is really affected by prolonged dry spells with less water in most of the areas. And in some of these areas here, you find that the communities live a nomadic person's life, whereby they look after cattle mostly. They do cattle keeping in most of these areas, and it's really uh, among the areas that are really affected by drought. Recently, I think it was last year, where people were dying of hunger, of famine, because the lands are really exposed to drought. There is no water, the shortage animals, even during the dry season, animals end up dying. And from that, with Caritas, I crossed over to the West Nile, whereby I joined the civil society budget advocacy group under the Disaster Preparedness and Response Project, which was covering nationals and then refugee hosting districts, whereby the project was to build capacities of the local governments to be able to respond to disasters when they happen. Because we realize when disasters happen, our communities get affected first, and then the assistance comes in late. You find even most of these there are challenges because disasters usually happen in our communities. Disasters, okay, often happen in the cities, but most cases they happen where communities stay in the sub-counties, for instance, in Uganda, the sub-counties, the villages, the districts, maybe to the region now, then you can now get maybe to the cities and other areas. So from there, we used to support our communities, both nationals. When I mean nationals and then refugees, these were projects that are really running in both the national communities, because nationals host the refugees. Refugees do not own land. Land is owned by the nationals. So through the office of the prime minister, and then the local governments, and then the UNHCR, which is the humanitarian arm responsible for refugees, they identify most of these areas whereby they can settle refugees, whereby they can be able to settle and give and have a safe haven in most of these areas. And they are given a plot of around 30 by 30 meters. You put up a shelter, and then you put up a small kitchen garden, and then something small whereby you can be able to settle for some time. And through that, after the advocacy that on the disaster risk reduction to increase allocation for funding, I also crossed over to Dan Church Aid as an environment and energy assistant officer who was based in Bidibidi, which is, I think, the second biggest refugee settlement. And when you can look it up, it's Bidibidi refugee settlement with around 5 zones. It's one of the biggest refugee settlements with very many refugees. And I was working as an environment and energy assistant officer, whereby my roles were to train, where most of these refugees settle. There's a lot of pressure for firewood, because in Africa here, most of us use firewood for cooking. And then also they do not have land for agriculture. So you find there's more pressure on the natural resources where these people settle. Find in actual sense, most places, these people cut down the trees because they are supposed to earn a living. Others sell charcoal. Others really clear land to have land for cultivation, for agriculture. And also some other lands are not really fertile. So you find through that, organizations, especially the ones I was working for, like for the Dan Church Aid, through assistance from UNHCR, were supposed to train these communities on establishment of woodlots. This could be woodlots for fuel wood. This could also be woodlots whereby they would be able to do agroforestry, because our major aim is to conserve the environment. And through this, refugees could not have land. So we would have a memorandum of understanding between the communities, the landowners, the nationals, and the different district heads or the sub-county leaders, to have these refugees use this land for cultivation, as well as they're maintaining these trees. We would grow the trees for them, and as well as they're maintaining them and doing agroforestry on these trees, they will be conserving most of these trees within the environment. We would also establish a land for fuel wood, because there are different types of trees that would really plant for fuel wood, especially the acacia and these other trees, which would be for wood, whereby we expect maybe at the end, some people would be able to sell them and be able to get some money and be able to change their lives and also conserve the environment. We also had trainings in renewable energy, whereby most of the refugees would have access to clean energy, because we're looking at ways of conserving the environment, whereby we would train them on having clean energy sources. That is training them on how to make charcoal briquettes from biodegradable waste, like for example, the crop residues, and then also the branches that would come from the waste, especially in the settlements of Bidibidi, the refugee settlement. And then we train them to carbonize this waste here, dry it, carbonize it, and then turn it into renewable charcoal briquettes, which would burn for 8 hours and conserve the environment. You save a cost on the cost of buying charcoal, because a bag of charcoal is around, let me say, 50,000 or 55,000, depending on where you buy it from, as well as you're affecting greatly the environment. So through this, you find that communities would really learn the skill of how to make briquettes. Charcoal briquettes are also clean, and would also train them on how to make clean energy cooking stoves. We have the fixed learner stoves, household stoves, that were really constructed in the settlements, where these people here are able to cook, are able to carry out a lot of things. Let me say, for example, cooking. You cook you conserve more energy. You find most of these cook stoves, you have around 3 pots, whereby you can actually boil water, warm sauce, cook food at the same time, using less of the charcoal. which will also make sure that you're conserving more of the energy of the fuel wood that you're using in most of these stoves, and the trees will also be safe. So there will be sustainable use of most of the resources that we're having there. And then from there, that was under the UNHCR project. Recently, I was working with ZOA as a biomass project officer in Rhino Camp. I've moved in most of the refugee settlements, especially the ones in West Nile, whereby we have Bidi refugee settlement, we have Palorinia refugee settlement, Mvepi refugee settlement, Lobole refugee settlement, Rhino Camp, Mvepi, where I've been supporting most of the communities around there, especially to sustainably use the resources in the environment. Because right now we're suffering the impacts of climate change, and you find most of the impacts of climate change are really getting back to the reason as why people are degrading down trees. People are cutting down trees massively, others are not replanting them, which is exposing the land, which is creating the soil erosion, which is creating a lot of drought, which is in most of these areas because the land is left bare and the soil, the water evaporates from the soil, which creates a lot of dry spells. And the areas are really going through prolonged drought and dry spells. And most of these areas are really in refugee settlements, and in most cases, they depend a lot on fuel wood. In Africa, we mostly use firewood for cooking. Yeah. Even the charcoal that is there, it's mostly actually they cut it down. They cut down the trees for charcoal, purposely for sale, so that they can be able to support their families. They can support their households within most of these communities. So you find it's because we know development has to go together with environmental conservation. The moment one is more than the other, you find there's more pressure created on the negative impacts will be very many, which means that most of our areas where we had the catchments, the water catchments, they will be left open, whereby the water will be able to evaporate in most of these areas. And then other areas also, you find the trees have really been cut, the soils have been left bare, the fertility, you find most of the refugee settlements, the soil there is not fertile. You find it's really sandy soil, and the soil is really very hot when you move over the sand. The sand is really too hot, and these people are supposed to grow crops. And during the dry season, especially for example, right now, in some of the settlements like Rhino Camp, areas have not been receiving rain for a very long time. You find in most of these areas, the crops are withering out. If I really had photos, I would share maybe photos with you. The crops are really withering out. The soils are really stone. If you've really seen gravel in most of these areas here, where you can't barely grow some types of crops. You know, most of these areas here are some types of crops. And then all this is done to supplement on the food that is given to the refugees. We all know the financial situation that has affected most of these humanitarian, especially the UNHCR. Funding has reduced, which has affected on the food ratio that is given to most of the persons of concern, the refugees, which necessitates them to have a memorandum of understanding with the neighboring communities and the neighboring landlords who have a lot of land, whereby some of them can be able to cultivate in most of these areas here and be able to sustain their families, sustain their households, in addition to the inadequate food that is given to them on a monthly basis, whereby they're either given beans, maize, and then and cooking oil to survive for the whole month. You find most cases this food is not really enough for them, so you find they're supposed to have more land to cultivate some more food, either vegetables, either some cereals, especially simsim, soya bean, and potatoes, cassava, because different areas have different type of foods that really they cultivate that can be able to support their household food security, as well as also support the children also within the settlements. And you find in other areas also, we train them also on how to use clean energy sources, that is especially the charcoal briquettes, whereby we support them to make clean energy sources, especially charcoal briquettes, because charcoal briquettes burn for almost around 8 hours. And construction of these Lorena stoves, we have the fixed Lorena stoves and the portable Lorena stoves, which conserve most of the energy. That is, as well as the reducing of the pressure on cutting the trees. Because with this, they would use waste, that is the branches or the husks that are coming out from let me say if it is the maize fields, the fields from where they have planted beans. These materials here are collected, the waste, and they are carbonized, dried, carbonized, and then they are really turned into charcoal briquettes whereby they crush them and then bind them using either clay soil or molasses or binding them with pepper to make rollite balls or make depending on the equipment they have, they're able to make them in different shapes from around 2 kilograms to 1 kilogram or even small pellets, whereby other people even sell them. They sell them to other people. I don't know whether I think a kilo of charcoal briquettes could be going for around I think 10,000 or 15,000 Ugandan shillings, whereby some of these can earn a living through selling these briquettes that they make from the wastes they get from the environment, and it really creates less pressure on the other resources, cutting down trees because you're using wastes from other parts of the environment to make use to energy. We also advocate for use of clean energy sources, especially now the solar energy, whereby you find the risks. Okay, Africa will receive sunlight from January to December. We receive sunlight, but little of it is really put to proper use. You find most of these areas actually, if we're using in our traditional homes or in the settlements, refugee settlements, most of these people here use kerosene lamps, either use kerosene lamps, and we all know the risk of using a kerosene lamp for cooking or for lighting, for lighting in their households. You find when they use them for lighting, there are always risks. Children are also reading at night using these kerosene lamps, and most of these are in grass thatched houses. In these grass thatched houses, you find that the mother can sleep off or the father can sleep off, and the lamp ends up catching fire, getting the mattresses, burning the whole households. Most of these people live in grass thatched houses. If you see the settlements, how Africans live, most of these areas, houses are together, and you end up the single household with the fire here can be able to burn almost the whole village, which also creates a very big risk. But with the introduction of clean energy sources like the solar energy, especially should be affordable. When we're looking at energy sources, they should be really affordable, whereby we're looking at the smaller lights. There is smaller lights, I think A2, whereby refugees and nationals are able to purchase them either at installments or they're able to buy them at different negotiations. Others can be able to pay in installments, others can be able to pay them immediately. And these lights take long. They just put them out, it charges, and you're able to light your house, especially the women who are at home, who are exposed a lot to the smoke, even the kerosene lamps that those exhaust fumes that come out from them affect the respiratory system of the women, the children, and the people at home. Which are in other areas, people have even died because of that pollution from these kerosene lamps. And then also others have those who have at least some money are able also to get some of these bigger solar panels and have gone on to do irrigation on a larger scale, whereby they're able to produce crops throughout the whole year, because most of these areas really where the refugees stay, there are a lot of challenges of water, especially it really gets very hot, especially towards the dry season. Areas go from around 35 to around 40 degrees, the heat, it really gets too hot. And in the dry season, you cannot grow anything. The animals even sometimes can die because there is no pasture. The water, the ponds, seasonal ponds that are there dry up, and the distances to the water, women move for longer distances. The children move to longer distances to get water. Sometimes the access water which is there is not clean or is not safe in most of these areas. That really affects humanity and it affects their health, which also affects sometimes other people really get to die because of really prolonged drought and really food insecurity in most of these areas. That's what I would basically say. Thank you very much.
Well, there's so many things that you've just said there, and it's amazing what you're doing, and that's why you got my attention in the first place. It's incredible. I mean, there's so many layers to this conversation, but I just want to just step back a little bit, because there's many people that might be listening to this who might not even know where Uganda is. So can you explain where the refugee camps are, how many people are in these refugee camps, and where they're coming from?
Thank you very much. To share with you, Uganda is in East Africa. it's found in East Africa. It's in the East African community whereby it neighbors Tanzania, Kenya, Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, and then Rwanda and Burundi. Because
So
now the East African,
it's in the area that's been really impacted by drought in the last few years, right?
yeah, in the Horn of Africa, I think, in
Yeah.
the Horn of Africa.
Yeah.
And Uganda, I wouldn't be so sure about the exact statistics because of the exact, but of course, Uganda hosts around 1.5 million refugees. I think 1.5 or 1.6 million refugees national. I think that can be found on the United Nations Humanitarian Refugee website, the current statistics, because they keep on being updated month after month. Uganda has different refugee settlements. Let me say, for example, in the southern western part of the country, there are different refugee settlements that are there. And me, I was basically based in the West Nile region, which is in the northern part of Uganda, whereby we had Lobule refugee settlement, Palorinya refugee settlement, Bidibidi refugee settlement, Rhino camp, and Mvepi refugee settlement. Because these settlements are really in different districts, the distance is really very, very big in most of these refugee settlements. And it's actually government through OPM, Office of the Prime Minister, that really allocate land where there's really land. Most of these refugees come in and they are screened and they are taken to resettle where they are resettled in most of these areas, depending on where there's land. As I was saying, the biggest challenge is actually availability of land to settle most of these people here. So the refugee settlements are in different areas, especially in the northern part of Uganda, that is in the West Nile region. Then parts of Kiriandongo, also there's a refugee settlement there. Then southwestern part of Uganda, there are different refugee settlements there. Then of course we also have the urban refugees who are within the city centers. Those are also part of the refugees, also all the asylum seekers who are also within Uganda. And the biggest numbers of refugees come from the neighboring countries, especially South Sudan, which was in war. Most of the refugees really get through Uganda for a safe haven, I think, because Uganda is really very receptive to most of these refugees. We have refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have refugees from Somalia, refugees from Rwanda, Burundi, especially the countries that are really neighboring Uganda, really get to cross to Uganda. And then really, because Uganda is very receptive, and also that's why you see the numbers actually around 1.5 to 1.6 million refugees who are really in Uganda and are really staying in most of these areas and really surviving from most of these safe haven that was created in the different districts. Yeah, because refugees are now settled in different districts where the refugee settlements have different names, or they are broken down into different names, but most of them are in different districts. So the West Nile part, in the northern part of Uganda, and then the southwestern part of Uganda that I'll be able to share maybe in other discussions. Thank you very much.
And what's, as far as the citizens of Uganda are concerned, are they supportive of the refugee community? Are they doing everything they can to help, or is it adding to social problems? Because I know that's a bit of an issue across the region. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, citizens in Uganda, of course, challenges are always there. We can't all avoid challenges because we all know what is involved with settling refugees, people who don't own land. Around, let me say, for example, if you have 16,000 people, refugees, who are coming to your district or your area or your province, how are you going to receive them? Because you're supposed to give them land. You're supposed to give them, we're on these plots of land whereby they're supposed to cultivate, get clean access to water, get food, and also get something small to do a living. And also their children are supposed to attend education. And really a lot is needed. But at least in some areas, really government has really done enough the UNHCR, which is the humanitarian body responsible for refugees. They have tried at least to talk to the nationals, especially those with land, to be able to coexist. We also have that peaceful coexistence whereby refugees and nationals really get to work together because we find in some activities, like for example, the cash for work activities, whereby we're establishing woodlots. We are supposed to have persons of concern all come together and work together. Though the land is owned by the national, but the different groups of people who are staying within that area have access to come and utilize this resource. If it is coming to dig on this woodlot, if it is 2 hectares, all these different groups who have registered can be able to come and be able to cultivate here. And then also we also have other trainings, especially on land rights, whereby some of these communities can be able to have MOUs, memorandums of understanding, with the landlord owners. Especially the biggest challenge of this is really a challenge of land, because the food ratio they are given is really a monthly food ratio, which may not sustain them for the whole period of the whole year, or the whole month. So you find they're supposed to have supplementary ways of how to increase the food production through getting in touch with the national communities to have more land and be able to cultivate to supplement on their food that is given to them. Though you will find others having kitchen gardens whereby they are growing crops, the vegetables which take around 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 months, so that they're able to supplement their nutrition at home. But with most of this, the challenge is some of these areas here are really affected by the impacts of climate change. You find the areas that are available are really bare, or if they have planted crops, the rain is not sufficient enough for the crops to grow well and support them support them to get really good yields that can be able to improve on their nutrition. You find in other areas also the cost of really buying seeds or seedlings to plant in most of these areas here is really very costly and really very expensive. But really, most of these areas here, with assistance from UNHCR, most of these areas have water sources, though which are not sufficient. They have water sources, either boreholes or taps, through different partners who implement that. They're able, because you all know these are humanitarian. There are different organizations that deal in different assistances, from children, educating children, those dealing in health, those dealing in child protection, or maybe protection, general protection at home, protecting, having, especially people with gender-based violence. There are those who are dealing in livelihoods, that is agriculture, and those who are dealing in environmental protection. Those are partners, right? And then also the government, because all these are under the government, under the office of the prime minister. Refugees are under the office of the prime minister, whereby the government is actually supposed to take care of them, because it allocates land and it allocates and keeps on monitoring them, as well as diversifying most of these areas where these partners are, and really advocating that most of these partners should also extend the same services they're giving here to the different refugee settlements, so that there's that peaceful coexistence. And really, Uganda has really helped a lot refugees, and really most of the refugee settlements, when you go in most of these areas, some people's lifestyles have really improved. You find really some other refugees are really better than the nationals, because really they have received some assistance, either they have put the trainings they have received into use, and they have really gone on to improve. Whereas really others have decided maybe to go back home to their native countries, but others, their families are really here. There are a lot of children, let me say most people really, if they came in 2016, most refugees came in 2016, up to now, you find people have spent really more than 5 to 6 years or 7 years in here. And now others are really nationals. They really feel as if they are really nationals. They speak the native languages, and really others have gone on to marry and really settled in most of these areas and coexisted with most of the national communities. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow, you're really it's amazing what the Ugandan government's doing. So the last time the big surge of refugees came was in 2016, which of course was when we were going through the last El Nino. So are we potentially looking at another sort of surge of refugees if it's climate related? But there's so many issues going on in Africa. I mean, just where you are in Africa, across that area, there's a lot more military coups happening. There's a lot of civil war that we know about. There's a lot going on. So what is driving the people to be on the move? Because nobody wants to leave their home, right? You only ever leave your home if you absolutely have to. I think that's something that people can't quite. People in the West don't seem to understand. It takes a desperate measure to get your family on the road, especially when the majority are women and children. And by moving, it actually puts them into great risk as well. So What are the reasons, and are we, is there going to be another surge, and how much can Uganda cope with?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I would answer it like this. Uh, Absolutely. No one ever wished to leave their home or go somewhere else. It's one of the experiences you should never feel to be really a refugee. It's really very hard, a decision really very hard, because sometimes it just takes you to be human for you to feel empathy for what really that person goes through. I think especially like the refugees who are really coming to Uganda, I would really say, especially the ones from South Sudan, it was a result from the wars, civil wars that they had, maybe out of elections, that really caused out wars, and people really had to cross over to Uganda, whereby most of these countries here, especially like South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, where there are always those peaceful either rebel groups or peaceful those wars. That's the major reason as to why most of the refugees really cross over to this country, because Uganda has been having peace for a lot of for some good years. So it's actually basically civil wars which has really caused most of these people to cross over to the neighboring countries, especially Uganda. Yes, for the climate crisis, yes, there are some people in other areas, neighboring districts, obviously, who cross depending on environmental conditions that are here. If maybe the rivers have burst their banks, if maybe the environmental conditions are not really friendly this side, other people usually move back and really again get back. And I really believe, I think with Uganda's reception, yes, it will continue to receive refugees, though it also needs assistance, especially in most of these areas here, because all know it really gets so costly. Uganda is not among really the developed countries; we're still in a third world country. But though we believe in the unity and also being human, and receiving most of the refugees, if really we have land and settling them down and having peaceful coexistence, especially in the neighboring communities who are really at need and can really be able to give need. So I really say that Uganda can really be able to go to support more and to really continue. As long as some land is there, they can be able to be settled. But of course, they need also more support from the different humanitarian arms and different humanitarian agencies, especially the UN and others, to really support most of these communities and support also the government to have really settle down most of these people, and also have them really have a meaningful life, and also the same life really that they have from their countries, also have the same within here.
Yeah. So people like you, there's 1.6 million refugees. So how many people like you are there? And I think I heard you say at the beginning that a lot of the funding has been cut. Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Where's the support coming from, and how much more support do you need to be successful?
Yeah, I think the amount of support really I cannot be able to say enough, maybe enough of the support. But because what I would share is, in most of these areas you find some of these projects really that are funded, you either find either they're funded by ECHO, the European Union arm, either they're funded by the World Bank, either they're funded by uh, UN, or different countries, especially different countries through their foreign affairs ministries, that really give support in form of donations or in form of projects, that where most of these projects here really happen in different areas, depending. But the challenge is, in most of these areas, really the funding gap has really reduced because of the financial situation that is really facing. You find that the UNHCR, which is the humanitarian arm responsible for giving more funds, is also stretched out. Especially, you find the same aid which was in Syria and Turkey, they're supposed to give the same response there. They're supposed to give the same response, let me say, in Morocco, which just received, I think, earthquake recently. Yesterday, as of yesterday, uh, Libya also received, I think, the same challenges. So you find it is the same humanitarian arm which is supposed to really support all this, but we just need to advocate for more, especially when most of these projects really close, especially projects that are really pertinent to the environment, especially agriculture, education, health, protection, environmental conservation, really most of these, and livelihoods and financial inclusion. training most of these areas here with financial literacy so that they are able to know how to save most of this. I would really suggest if really there are more projects, either most of the projects can be renewed or they can be able to support more of the funding through either the different ministries that most of these people here, some of these projects really can be able to go on and really maybe in different areas. They can also identify more people to work with, either empower most of the community because we're looking at sustainability. Of course, yes, as the government of Uganda is also supposed to support, to contribute part of in terms of really taking care of refugees, but also in most cases, this assistance is not really so much because really the budget of Uganda is around 51.8 trillion, whereby half of that goes to debt reservicing, which is really may not be really sufficient enough to give all the needs. But with more support really from different donations on different partner organizations, can be able to support most of these projects and really have them sustained because we find others are really 5-year projects, it's a 3-year project, or it's a 1-year project. When it ends, that's the end of it. Until maybe when you get more funding, you apply for more funding. So the biggest challenge is that I find really it's actually funding, which is the biggest challenge in most of these areas. Projects really would want to kick on, but then the financial part of it, whereby most of these areas need to be supported more with a lot of funding to support these activities. If it is nutrition, improving on the nutrition of the children at home, if it is early child development centers for education, especially children with the refugees, it really be better if most of these areas really advocate for and really make get more funding to support most of these other areas are also affected by the climate crisis, especially areas which are really prone to drought and again, really which affects them. You've seen the northeastern part of the country, which is also Karamoja, just affected, greatly affected by drought, prolonged drought, and most of those areas really, it gets really so hot. When it gets to around 40, 35, 36, 37 to around 40 degrees Celsius, it's really too hot during the dry spells, especially from around December, almost December up to around March. And sometimes you find really the dry spells in most of these areas really gets really too hot compared to other areas. And if the rains really come, they may come and rain very harshly. You find really if they come, they may result into floods. If they come, of course, some other areas like the ones in the mountainous areas, like in the Elgon region, they are always receiving landslides because it rains heavily and then the blocks, the soils rumble down and fall onto people. You've seen the river in western Uganda, southwest in Kasese, the river Nyamaba, always bursting its banks and destroying a lot of property, destroying a lot of lives. So, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
more assistance would be.
yeah, when you were talking about the Morocco and Libya and what's going on, and obviously in America, they've hit a record number of billion-dollar, climate events. The money required to clean it up. Insurance companies are stepping out. The cost of natural disasters is scaling up and up and up, which I could imagine means that for the work you're doing, it's going to attract less money, less attention, less support when you're doing. And I've worked with a lot of people that work in sort of charitable work, and they're doing good work in the world, and they're constantly in this state of stress because they don't know where the next money's coming from, and it's very difficult to do your job if you're in a constant state of stress. So, it's like how do you keep the faith? How do you stay positive?
Thank you very much. How I keep positive? I think first, I think you're supposed to first be humanitarian, like you to have self-love and really have empathy and really feel what really this person really goes through and really having hope that you can really create impactful meaning in most of these people's lives, whether small or big, it can really mean a lot to this person's life. Though to some other people they may think that most of these are what you're really doing may really seem to be very small, but to look very big in that person's eye, the person that you're really helping, because you never know, it might really put food on the table to this person, maybe for another 1 month, or maybe another 1 year, or maybe another 1 day. So though the support is really not enough, it's really not enough and you can't really do much, but just having that faith, because really projects come, you hold on, you wait, you look for other opportunities, but really the skills, whereby some other things are really voluntarily, whereby others really through the willing and the love that you really want to support really the communities and share your experiences with most of these communities can really help have more impact in most of these areas where most of these humanitarian actions are needed to support them, and also being always having that aim behind of being inclusive, having inclusion in all this, uh, taking care of someone irrespective of his race, irrespective of his status in the community. Is he a person with disability? Is he a rich person? Is he a poor person? Is he a child? Is it a lady? And really taking everyone, considering a person really a human being, whether whatever form that person is, and not really creating that inequality within this person and maybe saying this is maybe a third world country, this is a second world country, this is a first world country, having really unified decisions maybe, and also having people really having the same cause to really support most of the common good, especially in most of the communities that people really live.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted to interview you. Beautiful, right? So
Yeah.
for people listening in, what can we do? So one of the messages I'm always trying to get across, and so I'm in Thailand, I'm Australian, and I'm out there trying to wake people up to the situation we're in. And it was a few months ago, John Kerry, the special envoy out of the US, said there is absolutely no way that the US is going to be helping send money out. You were talking about the debt that the country is constantly scrambling to pay as well, which is happening all over the global south. You know, the idea that the region of the world that created the problem isn't going to help the regions of the world who are facing the problem first, but we're all facing it now. But if we can help people stay where they are, okay, civil war, social unrest, all the other things, that's a different. They're all connected, but if we can help people stay where they are by helping them flourish in the environment that they have, I know in the Horn of Africa it suffered from a terrible, terrible drought. But what can we do? What can we do? How can we support you? Who do we need to speak to? Who needs to hear what you're saying? How can we get the message out in a bigger way?
I think what we need, of course, they're basically one, especially there would be more support, let me say, in terms of funding, especially the humanitarian arms that are really supporting most of the areas within the refugee settlements and the areas that are hosting most of these persons of concern to really have more support and really give funding to most of these other areas, through more projects. If really it's constructing more schools, constructing more health centers, having more water sources, really be very good, because in most of these areas they will be able to be able to take themselves through whatever situation comes. Then the other would also be maybe uh, also our governments, though they're really not well off, to also prioritize issues of climate financing, maybe internally, to also have really priority to us, and we also look for assistance from other countries. The other would be especially the loss and damage fund in most of these areas, especially the polluters, the big polluters. Really, when you find the development, that's why you are seeing a really very big gap. Uh, Africa is in the third world countries, and maybe others are in the global north. Most of global north countries are in the first world. So there's really a very big difference, especially even in development and the amount of pollution. Let me say how much fossil fuels you people produce in the global north or maybe other areas that are far developed, which really creates impact. I think Africa contributes less of environmental pollution, because when you look at most of these areas here, really the level of development cannot really be as that in the first world countries. So suggest most of these areas here to support more projects, especially projects that are really in conserving the environment. There should be really more funding in most of these areas here, and also training most of this, and also training most of the people here and investing more, especially in clean energy sources. We're talking about renewable energy sources, especially geothermal, solar, wind, biogas, to have most of these areas investment. If able, they should also give uh, loans, green loans, whereby really therefore they're not having interests in most of these, that most of these countries here can be able to cope with the climate crisis and able to cope with most of these shortcomings that really come from most of these areas, and really also prioritize most of these areas in climate financing or climate funding when they give these areas here. And also when they have, we all know most of these climate solutions, local solutions require local problems. When they invite, let me say, during the different African summits or maybe different COPs or the different world environment engagements, we should really have an echo or leveled ground for us really to also participate effectively in most of these areas here, whereby Africa also participates, or different countries also give out their decisions, and really an action should be taken. We should not have a lot of policies, a lot of promises that are really not implemented. There are very many promises that really come from all these agreements here, the Kyoto Protocol, the different COPs, whereby most of these are really hearsay and are really not implemented. For us to really to mitigate the impacts of climate change, we require immediate effects. If we say we're cutting down on emissions, the first world countries should lead by example, because their pollutions, Africa might not even be polluting more than, might not even be contributing to more than 3% of the world's pollution, because really we're not developed. But we should really see most of these countries here really support and really implement really whatever they're saying. You shouldn't tell us not to use, let me say, fossil fuels, as we're not using fossil fuels, where you're using fossil fuels. You should really speak what you really meant, and really that's walking the talk. They should really lead by example, uh, invest more in renewable energy sources, energies that are really clean and can really conserve the environment, and have really more of the projects that uh, really help support the communities, especially livelihoods, agriculture, health, education, among others, to really have them really support most of this, and really also create, if there are really opportunities of having donations or funding, especially for the organizations that are really doing environmental conservation work, that are really changing people's lives, humanitarian arms that are really supporting this. They should really be given, I think, loans, especially, or even donations, because most of these really have bigger debts, especially debts that are really, with that, they cannot be able to really support most of these activities, and really uh, Africa really, or Uganda or different countries really require really more support in conserving the environment. And also, if there's also possibilities, also training most of the people who are skilled, the skilled people, the environmentalists, giving them more capacities in coming up with different energy solutions, in building, more, adding them more exposure, so that they can be able to come up with solutions that are really clean and environmentally friendly, besides the fossil fuels, because you always know more and more coal is being explored, or is being got from the ground to support energy. Different energy sources are being created, and yet you're saying we should use clean forms of energy. So we would really need immediate action, because climate change is really happening and it's affecting our communities, whereby it will not take time, and we need really immediate action, support most of the indigenous communities to really cope up with most of the shortcomings that are happening within the environment, to ensure that really we have immediate action. Thank you very much.
I think around the world, people aren't fully understanding what is happening on the ground in Africa. And the more that we can do, the more we can invest and help train, whatever it is, provide the money for people like you to go and be successful. The more we can help people stay where they are, which means that we won't have, millions, billions of people crossing borders and creating even bigger crises that we're not really ready to face. But I think the bigger message is all of us are at risk of becoming refugees in the world that we're moving into, as the extreme weather events become more extreme. So I think, having the empathy and the compassion that you were talking about earlier, I thought was really a beautiful way of putting it, because, safety and dignity is one of my top 4 requirements for life. It's air, water, food, and safety and dignity. I think they're the most 4 important things that we need to be looking at providing for all people.
It would also be, I think also the neighboring countries, all different countries really have that compassionate part, really have open access, really open borders, whereby really you treat people really with a lot of dignity and respecting people. And really, we have all these human rights. If we say really human rights are human rights, we should really respect human rights and really put them into action. Not only have human rights in papers or in most of these big conferences, and really we're not really having human rights at home and not having them really practically visible. So we'd really want to see most of these really be implemented in the communities that we are, and really see them really take course in most of the areas that we have. And maybe the other areas, maybe, for example, if we're going like for the COP28, can we be able to see really, if it is really discussion that we're saying we're cutting down on emissions and renewable energies, can we be able to see most of this implemented, most of these discussions really, if you're saying we're really focusing on this, can we have equal participation in most of these areas? Can we have the panels also shared with most of the people from the areas that are mostly affected by impacts of climate change, so that we really have equal representation? You cannot tell us you're fighting for us, but on the panel, people who are really presenting most of the areas, we really need people who have really gone through these crises here, these situations here, are the very people who really bring them out, because they really know what their problems are. And you cannot decide for us our problems, yet you've not gone through our problems. You've been a lecture room and you want to decide for us our problems, our solutions, and yet some of these are really local solutions and require local, these are local problems and maybe require local solutions. So can we have the people at the forefront of climate change or the environment, have areas that are really affected, have these people here participate fully? It should be a bottom to top approach and not a top to bottom approach, whereby you have the local leaders, the grassroots people, the communities themselves getting up and them really participating in everything, every decision that really comes. If you bring something, can you consult the communities? You shouldn't give most of these communities should be able to have equal access to decide on what works for them and what does not work for them, and not you simply saying maybe because you have the money or you have something, force people to really adopt what does not go with them, because people have different cultures, they have different mindsets. So you really need their conscience and maybe their consultancies for them to really to give you feedback and really participate in all the projects that they really do.
Yeah, you just nailed so many key points right on the head. And look, I know a lot of people are feeling pretty despondent, and a lot of people are slipping into despair that, we're not going to make it. It's gone too crazy. We've passed tipping points, all that sort of stuff. But I just want to present Aoja as an example of someone who's out there on the front line, doing everything he can, speaking up. He's participating in global conversations. He's really representing his country beautifully. I hope you're being recognized at home, but I don't think you're doing what you're doing for recognition anyway. But
there's a saying, there's a saying that goes, I don't know whether it applies, but of course, yeah, I've received some praises. I don't know if you've heard this, where they say a prophet is not respected where he comes from, but again, people who are outside, though it's not true. Some people really get to express and really thank you for the good work that you're doing, especially if you're doing really good to humanity and you're really doing it at the bottom of your heart. It's really very important, because the major important thing is you're feeling empathy and you want really to make someone's life really better. Maybe the other one was maybe to have equal participation in most of these other spaces or most of these other engagements, especially those that involve climate policies, climate actions, especially if we're talking about mitigation, loss and damage and adaptation. Can we have really equal participation in most of these areas? Yes, we have discussions between the global south and global north. Can you also have really a climate fund whereby climate financing, where most of these areas, especially that are affected and have not contributed in climate, most of these climate disasters that have really happened, can there be really justice, environmental justice in most of these areas here? That most of these areas will be able to really to receive funding and be able to support really their communities and really make sure that we have really equality in most of this. And also, uh, can most of our leaders really have a priority, take climate change, environmental conservation as a priority, and not simply as a theory? We do it practically. If you say we're having a target of planting 1 billion trees this year, can you be able to support us? Can you be able to support most of the communities, have access to most of these areas here? Can we cut down on emissions? If we're really saying this, we should say this. We shouldn't say this while you're doing the other way around. You say stop exploiting using more fossil fuels, whereas you're using more fossil fuels. If it is a no, it should be a no. If it is a yes, it should be a yes, and it should be equality without really closing one eye and one eye is open. It should be really a uniform and balanced and balanced state. And maybe the other thing would be I really be willing, really be part of most of these engagements, especially the international engagements. Like I think last year, I wasn't able to attend, I think, around 2 engagements because partially others are because of funding. The World Environment Day celebrations that were in Stockholm, I think I wasn't able to attend. Then the other, which was in Zurich, the Zurich Summit, I wasn't able to attend because sometimes it's really challenges of funding to really get to travel and maybe facilitate yourself. But I'm really much willing to share my experiences with different areas, different countries, with different people, share my stories, and as long as I impact communities, because I believe in actually doing more technical work in the field and supporting people right away, supporting people, living with people, and really living with people from their grassroots. Because I've really been raised up from a work background, and I've stayed really a humble life whereby I am supposed to associate with most people in the community. And besides that, I like interacting a lot with people, sharing my stories and making sure they're really doing well and making sure really uh, I inspire them. I inspire them or I change them and change their mindsets. And really, my stories really inspire them to really have faith and really that everything really can happen, but it takes a lot of time and with support and maybe also be able maybe upgrade and do maybe other, especially with trainings, especially in further studies, especially in environmental conservation, renewable energy, disaster risk reduction. All those trainings are really welcome in case of any support, and really, I'm really very welcome. I would really say that for God and my country, that's Uganda's motto, uh, and really always to feel empathy, which is, I think, a word in South Africa which says Ubuntu, having that passion like that person. Mm. Yeah, thank you.
I love it.
Merci.
Yes. You're such a special guy. So, right. So we need to get you funding to get you on the road around the world to tell the stories of what you're experiencing in Uganda. So if you're capable of doing that, how can people get in touch with you? I know that you're on X, formerly known as Twitter, and your handle is Aoja Aron. It's so
Yeah.
AOJAARON. So it's a straight. Where else are you? I've only found you there so far.
Yeah.
So is there a website or?
Currently, I have no website, but I think I have on Gmail. I'm on We Nature, and then Telegram, Telegram, WhatsApp. Maybe I'll be able to share other platforms where I am,
All
but
right.
most especially. And then sometimes we always have like let me say Zoom discussions on maybe Google Meet, Teams, and and then also on other platforms. Others, for example, others could be they call you and you co-host, or you co-chair. You always speak out, and those others you practically, as I told you, my major importance is I like practical sessions. I take someone through the field, tell him do this. If this is how you plant a tree, this is what you do it. I don't believe in theoretical things. I believe a lot in practical things because practical things really solve problems of communities, because well is what we always and the other thing is like for example in Africa, we really believe in tradition in African, let me say African, of course, having traditions. If we're respecting really African, if we say maybe food, most of the foods actually we get organic food from the garden. From the garden, you can even harvest food from the garden, wash it, cook it, and eat it without taking it to the supermarket. Others are really foods that are really got from the backyard gardens without really processing them. So you find most of our people are really used to local foods, traditional foods that are really not processed, and they're really very good, and also really to also embrace really change and also implement most of this. I think other platforms I'll be able to share them with you
Okay.
later on during the course of the day, maybe the discussions. I don't know if the contacts will be okay. If for those who maybe will
I'll add your Twitter handle to the notes, and if anyone wants to reach out and they can't find you, they can reach out to me, and I'll put them in touch. But awesome to speak to you. Thank you, and invite him into your chats, onto your podcasts, live streams, wherever you can, so that he can start getting the word out. And obviously, it would be great to get him on the road as well, talking about the story that's going on. I think more and more people need to know it. I don't think it is widely understood. I mean, we could have talked for ages, just, talking about the kerosene lamps and the importance of solar technology. And, a lot of people in Africa are using the, what do you call those?
And maybe the other would be maybe in other submissions, maybe we were saying, how can some of these people really support if there really accesses, for example, the renewable energy forms, if there are really grants maybe for solar panels, if there are really discounted areas whereby some of these people can be able to access some of these clean energy solutions, if there are really solar panels, can some of these people really be able to access them? And then the other, I think this was a discussion that happened in the African Climate Summit last week in Nairobi, whereby I think, is it John Klein from USA? What's his name? Remind me.
Which one?
From USA, the person, I've forgotten his name.
I'm not sure.
You mentioned his name earlier on.
Oh, John Kerry. John Kerry.
Yeah, John Kerry. Yeah, John Kerry, because they were like, yesterday is the very person who said there's no need of loss and damage fund. Then again, he was there again saying we shall give this. Of course, most of the people who make these commitments, they make commitments, but they are not implemented. You make commitments that are really not committed. We want to really see you commit, and then you really see effectiveness of what has been committed. If you're saying we're giving the loss and damage fund, can we be able to have this fund really active? Because some of these discussions really have been overdue. They really take so long, and really communities really, all people really get tired of them, and that's why most people either boycott them, because really it has really no meaning. If someone really has made a pledge or made a promise, why can't you implement this? And most cases, most of these people here are at the forefront of creating a lot of divisions, a lot of development in most of these countries, and the pollution is really too high. If really we're saying we cut down on emissions, cut down on, can they be able to support, let me say, reforestation in most of these areas? If you have a target of 1 billion trees, let me say Uganda has a target of 1 billion trees, planting trees. Can we be able to see funding for most of these activities? Can we be able to see, sometimes people say we are cutting down on emissions, but these are the very people who are doing a lot of flights. You're doing a lot of flights, and yet if you're cutting down emissions, we're going green. Can we be able to go green? And can you be able to support most of the initiatives that we have, support most of the solar making projects? So let me say the youth who are making most of this, there are youth who are really making environmentally affordable solutions, but they're really not supported. And can you be able to see climate solutions be localized? Local problems, local solutions, whereby most of these communities can be able to access them. You cannot create a local solution. For instance, let me say if you're creating if you're creating electric cars, how many people in the communities can be able to afford local cars? Others maybe can be able to afford bicycles or maybe motorcycles. Can you be able to have really everyone really catered for and really have everyone participate in this and really have affordable solutions, easy access, because we look at accessibility, and the cost, and then the reliability of most of these solutions that you're really giving us. And above all, having equal participation in most of these spaces. If it is really an African space where we're discussing challenges and solutions affecting us, Africa knows its challenges and solutions better than anyone who is not here, because you might be reading them through articles, but some of us have lived through them, whereby it really needs someone. You cannot, like, if I've not lived in Thailand, I cannot say that I know the situation in Thailand better than you who has lived there, or you who is in Germany, or you who is in Switzerland, who knows the proper solutions within there, the proper timing within there. You bring something which will not work for the communities because you've not consulted the communities, because you've not engaged them in assessing their needs assessments. You should really have equal participation in whatever they do, so that we're able to have a conclusive or a wholesome approach whereby everyone has really participated in different parts of the decision making of anything. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're so right. It's just more colonialism, right? When these rich Western countries come in and tell you what you should do to solve your problems, it's and you know, just in this last week, they've just talked about America, UK, Australia, Canada, their plans for fossil fuel growth. It's just like we can't. You know, and people are talking about 2.6 to 4 degrees warming, and I don't think people quite understand that once we get past 2, basically, there's
issues of climate change, environmental conservation are really not a priority to most of these people here, especially the rich people. It's not a priority to them. So because really some others can really survive, they can be able to really exist, but really have to feel for the communities who are down, who really dig, who really depend on agriculture, especially subsistence farming. Those who only grow food for home consumption and very little for sale, are really putting most of these people really at really the forefront and really having most of the discussions, especially now, like for example, the COP28, which is supposed to be in Dubai. Will the discussions be around renewable fossil fuels, because they're among the fuel loads?
They're in the list. They're in the list of increasing their fossil fuel production. Yeah.
Because we wait to see really meaningful discussions and really we shouldn't really have, because you look at all these COPs that have happened, 26, 22, 23, 24, 26, now we're going to 28. Mm-hmm. But what tangible things do they have? What action plans do they have of this? Yes, we're talking about carbon credits or carbon financing. How much are we contributing? Who decides on the carbon credits, on the carbon finances? How much should it be? Do we also participate equally in determining the prices of the different carbon markets, so that we have equal opportunity? Because we are suffering actually the impacts which are not meant for us, because most of these areas are really affected by most of the crises which have not been really engineered by them. Can also have the loss and damage fund, or maybe say the funding, have a pool of funds whereby if really countries or areas are really affected. I don't know if you've heard about MAPA, most affected places, whereby most of these areas really are given priority. If they're really environmentally related disasters, these people should really be given assistance, because we all know most responses, especially health, it should be around 72 hours. If these are others require around 48 hours. So depending on this, because these are emergency response, we shouldn't come and really always come after disasters have really happened and really come and tell communities, sorry about this, and come and take photos because disasters have happened. Can we have more support also to early warning systems, both indigenous and scientific early warning messages? Because we need more investment in most of these disasters that are really happening. Some of them are really predictable. Can we have more funding to have most of these systems installed if they're really indigenous early warning? Because we have indigenous early warning messages whereby communities can be able to tell, either we shall expect floods in this month, we shall after seeing some signs. We'll have this, and also have the scientific early warning systems whereby we really have because as I think under the United Nations, I think disaster risk reduction, where they said, I think $1, what I'm really forgetting that, whereby they say the cost of $1, I think when disasters happen, we really lose much more than mitigation. The cost we really incur in restoring communities back to where they were, it's way much higher than how much would have been done to mitigate the impact before it happening.
Yeah.
So you find constructing roads, hospitals, schools is way much expensive than you setting up an early warning system that will be able to alert communities and be able to guide them before disasters happen so that they are really protected with their property, and also putting persons of concern at the forefront.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. We've got to get off the back foot. It's every government across this world. Everyone's on the back foot responding to disasters once they happen, rather than saying what is going to happen. You know, there's a reservoir near me that was dug out and doubled in size after the floods last year. We haven't hit floods again this year, but it's almost full. So at the time when it was being dug out, I said, based on what we're seeing and the extremities of what we're seeing, that should be triple the size rather than just double the size. You know, we've got to start planning for what's coming and listening to the scientists and what they're saying. You know, for every 1 degree, there's 7% more moisture in the air. How does that translate into floods? How do you prepare for floods? You know, looking at El Nino and La Nina, the trends, like floods in this part of the world, fires in this part of the world, and then reverse. You know, I mean, it's obvious what's coming, and it's like the human being is incapable of saying, I can think that far ahead. And it's, yeah, we've got a lot to do all over the world. But I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your work and your passion and your empathy and your compassion. And thanks for being a shining star in this world. And I just wish you nothing but success. And I'm here to help you any way I can. And I just wanted to get your story out there because I think it's a story that people need to hear, because there's so many great people doing amazing work. And we don't hear about them because we're too busy listening to the latest story of Kanye West or Kim Kardashian or
it's not a
all
priority.
that other nonsense.
Those are not priorities. And actually, if most of these people here were taking most of these as priorities, really, most of these people really take going to the space as a priority, going to check on the wreckage of Titanic as a priority, and yet there are really some other issues that are really so pertinent and that really, maybe in case of anything, you can also get in touch with me. Yep. Maybe, most probably, I'd really wanted to attend COP28 and then some other international engagements. Maybe in case of anything, we shall keep sharing and then see how we get further. And then in case of any other being on part of other spaces, I can be able to come and then share more and really have most of this. And then always willing to learn more and always having communities at the forefront and having affordable and accessible solutions to most of these problems would really help our communities and really implementing immediately, because climate crisis is really hurting, but the other communities are really suffering. So it shouldn't wait. We should really have immediate action to most of these promises and responses that we have. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So thank you for your time. And I'm going to keep an eye on you, all right?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care of yourself, all right?
Take care too. Thank you.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Uncommon courage should be everywhere.